Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Zoominar for Nonprofit Net today, addressing the leadership vacuum by supporting emerging leaders. I'm Dennis Boyer, a Nonprofit Net board member, and my attention is a little bit split today because as I speak, I'm also attempting to admit people into the meeting from the waiting room. So my eyes are wandering everywhere. You know why. Our Zoominars are open to everyone without charge. Even so, we do incur some cost to bring them to you. So we hope that you'll consider supporting us. And since this is NPN's 20th anniversary, we're suggesting perhaps a $20 contribution. We do need your support to keep the Zoominars coming your way. So we'll send you a link to our donation page. We'd also appreciate your feedback on today's Zoominar because it helps us plan and it's very important to our speakers. So along with that donation link, we'll send you the link for our survey, a short survey. And now, on to today's speaker, Bob Green. Bob is a coach and organization development consultant who works with emerging and established professionals to energize leadership development, build real teams, and create collaborative workplaces. He's consulted with a wide range of local and national organizations, and he also created and facilitates the biannual Emerging Leaders Academy at the Community Foundation for Metro West. And with that intro, Bob, over to you. Please take us to this wonderful field of how to develop leadership.
Well, thanks so much, Dennis, and thank you all for making some space in your day for this session. And in fact, making time and space for professional development is one of the themes of the session. So you are here, you are doing it. So thanks so much. And I also just really want to appreciate Nonprofit Net, Dennis, and also Dora Wang for all their work in helping to organize and get this going. So it's been great to work with them both, and I'm really appreciative of that. So I am going to fire up PowerPoint slides. We are watching the chat, and I'll be stopping at various times for questions, comments, and you will be receiving these slides and a handout that I created that kind of serves as almost an executive summary, if you will, of some of the points that I'll be raising. So with that, let me share my slides. Okay. Now, just let me make sure, can you all see the title slide? Great. All right, fantastic. And again, I can't see all of you now, so please use the hand raise feature or put your comments or questions in the chat, and I will get to as many of them as possible. All right. So the agenda for our time together, you are here at the introduction. I'm going to offer you some data to provide some context for what I'll be sharing. And just a quick perspective on leadership that's maybe a little bit different than what all too often we think of as leadership. And then we'll be spending most of our time together talking about steps that individuals can take on their leadership development journey, and then ideas for supervisors or team leads to support people in developing as leaders, and ideas for senior leadership and looking at the organization as a whole to create a culture of professional and leadership development. So we're not only talking about emerging executive directors, we're really talking about leadership development at all levels. And there's no one easy, one size fits all answers. So I'm going to give you a lot of ideas to mull over, and hopefully you'll find pieces of the puzzle that work for you and for your scenario. But one point that I really hope comes across, that even with tight budgets, and what nonprofit does not have a tight budget, there are things that we can be doing to support professional and leadership development. Okay. And again, the slides are going to be available. I will make a kind of an executive summary, a 2-page handout available to you. I'll be stopping for questions at various times. Dennis is going to be helping to monitor the chat. And we probably won't get to every question and comment that everyone has. So I'm happy to follow up with you directly afterwards. And my contact information is in the materials that you will receive. And I just hope that you'll take this as an opportunity for yourself to step back a little bit from the day-to-day and to really reflect on your own professional leadership development, as well as how you can support others. All right, so I want to just offer you a few data points to provide some context, and the links to the sources for the data are in the slides if you want to follow up. But in a fairly recent survey done by National Council of Nonprofits, they found that the respondents, more than half of those who responded, said they had more vacancies now than before the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the 3 top reasons they thought for that turnover were salary competition, budget constraints, and stress and burnout. Right. So you're probably not surprised about salary being an issue. But I want to make the case that it's not only about salary as we go forward. Now, finding data in the nonprofit sector isn't as easy as finding it in other sectors. So I'm drawing on a variety of sources. So a 2021 study by the National Association of Student Affairs Administrators found that the top reasons for people leaving were salary, but also burnout due to crisis management and stress, and perceived lack of value and appreciation of staff. And notice, while salary, again, is number 1, the others are close behind. They're all in the 80th percentile here. So, one theme, one conclusion I have is that if turnover is frequent, you can't just say it's salary and you can't just blame it on individuals. There's something else going on. All right. So a variety of studies, and again, you're going to receive the slides with all the links. So, no need to copy everything down in the slides unless that's your preference. But a variety of studies across different sectors indicate that individuals who leave a position, there are very well individuals who leave primarily because of compensation, but it appears that a variety of factors are coming into play in terms of turnover these days. One of those studies done by the well-known McKinsey consulting firm found a real gap between reasons that employers thought people were leaving and the employees themselves, the responses they offered. And high up, employers thought that compensation was by far number 1, right? Well, compensation is an issue, no question about that. But other really high reasons that employees were giving for leaving included not feeling valued by their organizations, not feeling valued by their managers. And there's lots of data that indicate the importance of managers and supervisors in engagement, retention, and morale. And also employees were saying that they didn't feel a sense of belonging at work. The same study by McKinsey, I'm quoting here, they found notably employees who classified themselves as non-white or multiracial were more likely than their white counterparts to say that they left because they didn't feel they belonged at their companies. Again, I'm rushing through these data points, but again, you're going to get the slides, and I will also stop for questions or comments soon, but I want to cover a few more points. The Conference Board is a national nonprofit that does research really around the business sector. But again, I think the findings form a pattern that holds for the nonprofit sector. So in a 2022 national survey, they found, and I'm quoting, 58% said they are likely of employees, professional office workers, well over half said that they are likely to leave their company without professional development or continuing education and career training to help develop new skills, stay up to date on current trends, and drive career advancement. And this likelihood to leave holds especially true among women, people of color, and millennials. In that same study, they concluded that for people of color, there may be a gap in access to these opportunities that are offered. So whatever opportunities are offered, people of color see a deficit in what is available to them. The survey reveals that more people of color report a lack of opportunities and resources for professional development than do their white counterparts. So this McKinsey Conference Board study is an interesting one. And I also want to point you to the work of the Building Movement Project and their Race to Lead work. And they have a series of studies of executives of color in the nonprofit sector and challenges that they face. In looking at the nonprofit sector, in a study, and this is a few years old now, but I think it still holds. So the Center for Creative Leadership and American Express sponsored a study. And what they found is individuals may be more willing to stay in an organization if there are learning and development opportunities, or conversely, to leave if learning and development opportunities are not prioritized by the organization and its leaders. So one thing the nonprofit sector has going for us is mission. People are, typically, maybe not always, but so often are involved in nonprofit organizations because of the mission and because of the incredibly valuable and important work that we do. And yet, long term, that may not be enough to keep people with high potential in positions. So having opportunities to grow professionally are also really important and can be a factor that weighs up there with compensation. Okay. All right, so that was a few data points that I think show a real pattern. Any comments or questions before now I move on and offer you a way that I like to look at leadership and leadership development? But any comments or questions on anything so far? Okay. All right, and again, if you do have anything that you want to share and want to put into the chat, that's fine. Use the virtual hand raise feature, and I'll be stopping several more times as we move forward. All right, so an approach to looking at leadership that I want to share with you is something that's really Ronald Heifetz, who teaches at Harvard, is a leader in this, and he talks about adaptive leadership. And I'm drawing from a presentation he made in 2016, where he said, leadership is a practice with and without authority that mobilizes people to make progress on tough adaptive challenges in order to thrive in a changing and challenging world. He goes on to say leadership is not defined by power, personality traits, or position. Okay. I'm excited about this view of leadership because it helps, I think, move from, the very stereotypical, charismatic man who has all the answers and whom everyone follows view of leadership, right? That this is about leadership quality that brings people together and develops collective wisdom, if you will, to solve very difficult problems that don't have easy answers. Heifetz and his colleagues go on to compare adaptive challenges and technical challenges. Adaptive challenges, they say, is where problems and solutions are not well defined and collective learning needs to take place. And if that doesn't sound like what we are trying to accomplish in the nonprofit sector, I don't know what does. Compare that to technical challenges, where the problem and solutions are clear. Now, to be clear, technical challenges can be very difficult and require considerable expertise. So they're very important, but they're things that we know how to do. We just have to do them well, and they require good management. Whereas adaptive challenges, where we don't really know what all the answers are and how to best move forward, those are more adaptive challenges. And that really requires adaptive leadership and not only effective management. Okay. Thoughts, questions about this idea of adaptive leadership? Because it really is, for me, it provides a basis for where we're going for the rest of the talk. Okay, great. So where I want to move now is, actually a couple points. I realized one other point I want to make here is that another really important thing about this concept of adaptive leadership, and Heifetz says this in the quote I shared in the previous slide, is that people at all levels of an organization can take on leadership. So people at all levels could potentially lead a project team, study an issue for solutions, be involved with strategic planning, on and on and on. So we're not just talking about executive level leadership here, although absolutely, I think what we're talking about today applies to the executive level, but we're talking about all levels in the organization. All right, so I like to talk about being on a leadership development journey. And there are four, I think, foundational elements in moving forward in our leadership development journey. I'm going to be talking more about each of these as I go forward, but just very quickly. One foundation is what I call the inner work of leadership, right? There's a famous book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and that person's actually written about leadership. But so I'm kind of building off of that idea. I'll say some more about this and give you a good example of it. But this is where, what is my view of leadership? What are my values? What are my biases, triggers, strengths, areas for growth? All that inner work that provides a foundation for effectively working with others. Another foundation is ongoing education and training. And you're taking advantage of that right at this moment. So kudos to all of you. Learning by doing, on-the-job development. There are some out in the field who say this is the main way for people to grow professionally. It's certainly incredibly important. So this gets us into something called stretch projects, finding ways to stretch on the job and learn and grow. And connecting with others and learning from others. So colleagues, mentors, and networking is part of this. So these are four foundational elements, I believe, for professional and leadership development. They're not exclusive. We really want to use all of them. What we'll be moving now is to talk about, well, what can individuals do on their own to be proactive, to take advantage, if you will, or build on these four foundations. And also, what can their supervisors do, and what can organizations as a whole do? And that's where we're really going to be spending the bulk of the rest of our time together. And as I go through these various points, think about for yourself and how, because I believe the leadership development journey is lifelong. So think for yourself, where are you on the journey in terms of your own journey and perhaps supporting and helping others? Okay, before I launch into this, comments, questions, anything that's resonating with folks so far? I also do workshops on introverts and extroverts. So I'm wondering, are we all introverts on this call, or is it just Zoom, just being on a Zoom call?
I can say a few words of what's coming to mind as this is my second go around as an executive director, and it's a little different in the previous executive director role in that I was at the organization for 7 years and came up the ranks, and this is a newer, like, I'm starting as the executive director. So, some of the things that you're talking about in terms of like learning by doing and stretch projects, uh yeah, it just brings up, like, yes, it's important, and it's scary, and there's a place of, like, where you might be muddling through it and not presenting the best way that you want to present, and in order to learn you have to, like, get through that, and yeah. So that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about the learning by doing.
Well, fantastic, Sarah. Thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, by definition, it sounds like in your current scenario, you're by pretty much everything is learning by doing, in a sense. So, you know, you so I just from the little that you said, I'm guessing you have a lot of resilience, and you're doing some of that inner work of leadership to hang in there in what sounds like a wonderful but also challenging opportunity. I also hope there are folks you can connect with and talk about what you're experiencing, and get the kind of support, because unfortunately it can be lonely at the top for people in executive leadership. So just those are a few things that come to mind. So thanks so much for sharing. I'm noticing in the chat, um, Nahir, and I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. This is really insightful, Bob, and makes me think of a lot about what different types of professional development supports are needed to strengthen the middle of the leadership bench and pipeline. Yeah, absolutely. And we're really talking about all levels of the organization and all levels of leadership, that no matter what position someone's in, they can take on leadership. They can express leadership. So I hope that you do find some ideas that are relevant for working with people in the middle. And again, I'm happy to follow up with people afterwards to chat if you'd like. Okay. One more question from Priscilla. We are a small, growing volunteer nonprofit with salary being an issue for finding leadership. What kind of salary range would be appropriate for a full or part-time grant writer, executive director? That question is above my pay grade, I'm afraid. That's not one of my areas of expertise. There are wonderful HR consultants in the nonprofit sector who would probably be wiser in terms of supporting that question. So Priscilla, if you want to follow up with me, I'd be happy to make referral on it. But again, I would think about what can you draw from today's workshop to make that position attractive, because it may not only be salary. So what kinds of opportunities can you offer for someone to stretch and grow and build their career, even if they don't stay for 3 decades with your organization? So it's not only about salary, although salary is absolutely important. Compensation is absolutely important. So, but again, that is beyond my area of expertise, but I'm happy to share referrals and then talk about other elements that might be attractive to a potential candidate. All right, so I'm going to move on now to share some steps that individuals can take to support, proactively support their own leadership development. Okay. So one is to proactively move forward and discuss your career goals with your supervisor. Now, hopefully you have a supervisor who's open to having this discussion. And all too often, people don't have a supervisor they can talk to. So then who else can they talk to? Is there another mentor in the organization or outside of the organization? To look yourself for potential stretch project opportunities. Is there something that's happening that maybe you could get involved with to stretch your own personal development? Again, if you're working with a supervisor who's on to this and is willing to work with you on that task is easier. Reaching out to colleagues, network. And I advise people to network within and outside of the organization, but definitely within, particularly in larger organizations. It's very easy not to know what someone in another department is doing and how the two of you can maybe collaborate. So it's a great use of time and a great way to grow and learn. And identifying one or more potential developmental relationships. So by developmental relationship, I'm talking about a mentor, a colleague, perhaps within or even outside of the organization, a coach, the idea of an accountability partner. And what I mean by that phrase, the accountability partner, is someone that you meet with on a regular basis and talk about how things are going and have you move forward on those great things you said you were going to do to advance your career. So to hold with a supportive partner, hold each other accountable. And I have an accountability partner. Every 2 weeks, we have a half-hour call and just check in with, are we moving forward in those great things we said that we want to do? And I've talked about this presentation with my accountability partner. And again, individuals can find these kinds of support for themselves, but it's ideal when their supervisors and others in the organizational leadership are helping to do this. Some other thoughts for individuals, steps to take: to look for educational opportunities, including free and low-cost resources. You may be right here on one of those, right? So Nonprofit Net has a wonderful series of workshops. There are others out there. For people in Massachusetts, you can get an e-card to the Boston Public Library and access LinkedIn Learning. So, and then of course, attending conferences. I facilitated a roundtable on this subject at the Mass Nonprofit Network conference last week. So there are wonderful opportunities out there. Some of them are free and low cost. And from all of the above, consider your values, goals, strengths, leadership style, habits, biases, triggers, ways, what happens on a day-to-day basis that kind of off a little bit. So growing in that level of self-awareness is that inner work of leadership, and it's incredibly important, and it often gets ignored or given short shrift in all too many leadership programs. But it's so important. It gives the stamina and the resilience and the insight to work through challenges over the long term. I'd like to just give you a fast example of someone I supported in this. This was a coaching client with someone who was considering leaving their organization. And this was an organization where they wanted the individual to take on more leadership and really grow as a leader. However, the individual themselves just wasn't so sure they wanted to do that, and even whether they wanted to stay in the organization. Now, the organization did provide a modest amount for professional development, and this person chose to do executive coaching, and I had the great honor to work with them. And so a couple of things were going on in our discussions. One was this individual's view of what leadership even was or is was limited by the models that they saw either in the organization or without. And they also didn't give themselves credit for their own leadership. And they were asked to lead project teams. They were even asked by their supervisor to take over when the supervisor went on parental leave. But this individual was not giving themselves credit because their style of leadership was so different. Also, they were wondering about their values and whether their values were in step with the organization, because this person put a really strong value in work and family life balance, and they weren't always seeing that in others in leadership in the organization. So to make a long story short, through a few leadership coaching calls, one thing that I supported the individual to see is there's many ways to be an excellent leader, and they didn't have to be that charismatic great man with all the answers, and that their facilitative and active listening style of leadership was true leadership, and it showed, and they were getting kudos in the organization for their leadership. And what the person decided to do was ask for open conversations with a couple of key people in the organization about what it would be like for them to become a leader, and could they maintain their strong values if they did. And happily, the organization, the leaders that the individual talked to stepped up and said, yes, the person has stayed with the organization, taken on more leadership, and is doing pretty well from last I heard. So again, an example of the inner work, and for that person having access to a coach, but it doesn't have to be a coach. It could be a mentor, it could be a great colleague in another department or another organization that they might be able to talk with. Okay, comments or thoughts about steps individuals can take to support their own leadership development before I move on? Anyone else? Oh, let's see okay. I don't see anything new about this in the chat. So, okay, I will continue to move on. We're being very efficient here. But please jump in with any comments or questions.
I was gonna jump in again.
Okay, Sarah, please.
I can't help but think about, you had said it's important to get support, and that's a message that I've heard, and I've had the opportunity to get executive coaching, which has been really helpful for me in studying my values. And I have, as a leader with 2 small children at home, I also, juggle this what a leader should be narrative that we have with the importance for me around work-life balance, and making sure that I'm spending time with my small children and my husband. So,
yeah.
I bring that up because it's not easy, right? Because this is the message that we're seeing and hearing, especially, in our culture of bottom line, high performance, or not necessarily like individual organizations culture, but like the narrative that we hear,
Yes.
Living in a capitalist society it's very hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, you're really reinforcing, I think, what I'm saying here, and I really agree with everything you've shared, Sarah. It really is hard, and it benefits organizations to take this seriously, to keep great people like you on board for a while. Now, eventually, you and others may choose to make a change, and that may be the best for everyone, but not before your time. And what happens all too often is people leave well before they've come anywhere close to their potential within an organization, because unfortunately, the organizational culture doesn't support the kind of balance that you're talking about. By the way, just kind of as an aside, I'm no longer using the term work-life balance. I'm starting to talk about work and life integration, because work is part of life, right? Work and family and personal development are all part of life. So it's how do we balance all of those key pieces? So it's not work against life, it's how do we balance all of those and integrate them. And it sounds like you're doing that, Sarah. So again, thank you so much for sharing. Any other comments before I move on to talk about supervisors? Okay. All right. So again, the relationship with a supervisor is so important as an element in the morale, engagement, retention. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in supervisory positions who, excuse me, have been promoted because of technical skills, but not necessarily because of skills in terms of supervising and leading others. And also a lot of supervisors I've come across don't feel like they even have time to work on the kinds of things that we're talking about. Yet it's so self-defeating, because I think it's part of the work of facilitating the work of the people that are on our team. So I want to suggest the importance of, for supervisors and team leads, to connect regularly with each direct report and have regular check-ins, not to just rely on an annual review. And I'm going to, for a second, get on my hobby horse. I'm really opposed to annual reviews, or at least annual reviews in isolation. I saw someone with their thumbs up. Thank you for that. That fine, do annual review, but it really should be a summary of what you've been talking about all year long and goal setting for the future. If you're problem solving and coming up with surprises during the annual review, you've waited way too long. So just whether or not you do an annual review, fine, but have regularly scheduled check-ins during the year on some schedule that makes sense. And as part of those regular check-ins, identify clear goals and review progress. And as you're reviewing progress, coach staff in working through obstacles and problems. Don't just give them the answer, right? One, it may be an adaptive challenge where no one person has the right answer. But even if you feel you do, it may still be worth supporting the individual in mutual problem solving, because that's going to help them learn and grow and become a better, more effective problem solver themselves. Right? So taking a coaching approach to work as a supervisor can pay off really great dividends, I think. Some more for supervisors to think about. In terms of career, professional leadership development, open the conversation. Don't wait for individuals. So show that you're interested in their development goals. And because you're meeting with them on a regular basis during the year, you'll have some time to do that rather than waiting for the annual review. You can see I feel strongly about that annual review stuff. Help them create a development plan and action steps. So actually work with people who report to you to support them in thinking about how to move on in their career. And you're going to help them develop their potential so that they're able to offer the best that they can offer to the organization by doing that. At some point, they may choose to leave, but they may choose to do that anyway. Make professional growth a regular topic during check-ins. So some more for supervisors. Oh, by the way, I just noticed in the chat, Rebecca said, love work-life integration, especially as the boundaries blur between with in-person and remote work. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. Absolutely. We're in a different day and age. with hybrid and remote work being so, it's now much more of an expectation, not for everybody, I know, but for a lot of people. And so let's take that into account, right? Which actually now ties into something I want to say. For leaders, for supervisors, to work at starting to get in touch with what might be your own unintentional biases, to make sure that you're connecting fully with all of your team members, including remote team members. What often happens is something called proximity bias or affinity bias. Proximity bias is just having a bias relating more to people who are physically co-located with you. Affinity bias is connecting more with people who, for some reason, we feel are more like us, right? Well, it's a lot harder for people who are working remotely to have the same level of connection unless you take the initiative to make sure that you're connecting with them all. Okay. Facilitate team meetings so that all voices are heard and encouraged to contribute. And effectively delegate and share responsibilities among team members. I've come across a lot of people who move into supervisory positions who continue to do everything they were doing before they were promoted and have supervisory responsibility. And that's just asking for challenges. And that's not on just that individual. That's an organizational level issue that needs to be considered, because leading others requires attention. And being an excellent supervisor is part of the job and requires attention and requires time and effort. So one way to gain some of that space is to effectively delegate, to let something go, check in with people, to check in on progress, but you simply can't do it all when you move up in a new position. I'm gonna put one more slide up here on supervisors, and then I'll check the chat. So again, for supervisors and team leads, and I'm spending a good amount of time on ideas and steps for supervisors and team leads because they play such an important role. But to help identify and create opportunities for development, to look for those stretch projects that you can offer to a team member to help them learn and grow. So for instance, to take on a project leadership, or to take on leading the effort to make a presentation at a conference, for instance. There's lots of things that can be offered for people to work on and to grow. And even if you can't provide funding, make space and encouragement for learning. So to take an hour and attend a nonprofit net webinar, okay? Or to attend Mass Nonprofit Network's conference. Or in the Emerging Leaders Academy that I'm honored to offer through the Community Foundation for Metro West. It's during the day. And so folks need support from their organization to take a few hours on a regular basis for their professional and leadership development. However, they're going to be able to contribute so much more back to the organization if the organization provides that space for them. Okay. All right, so comments, questions around steps that supervisors can take to support leadership development. I'm gonna look at the chat. Jenny wrote, how can a new leader work to change a culture where staff have not been expected to meet regularly or discuss professional development and are resistant to do so? What a challenge. So I wish I had the magic, easy answer for that, but it's a process. I hope, and I'm not going to assume this is you, Jenny, but I hope the person in that position has support from, for instance, their board or other executive leaders to start to work on changing the culture, to talk about why this kind of meeting on a regular basis is important and how people are going to benefit from doing it. These are all the kinds of things that I think are important. If we were chatting about this offline, and I'd be happy to do that, I'd want to ask more about the specifics so that I can offer suggestions that are tailored to your situation. But in general, those are some thoughts. And the next and last set of slides are talking about changes that can be made at the organizational level. And so we have to look at all levels of the organization. How can an individual benefit from these kinds of regular discussions and professional development? How can supervisors encourage that along with their colleagues? And how can the organization as a whole promote this kind of culture? We have to look at these kinds of organizational change issues at multi levels, I think. So again, I talked in generalities. I'm sure I haven't specifically addressed the concern, but I hope that at least was helpful. And Nancy put in the chat, for a group that's all volunteer, have you come across creative strategies to encourage members to grow and be challenged, especially when their locations are spread across a wide region with various backgrounds? Zoom meetings, emails, surveys, sending updates for training and growth. Yeah, again, Nancy, thank you for that question. And as you can see, I often preface a response with saying there's no one right answer. that it's going to be different in every situation. But all of the above, everything that you mentioned in your chat message, I think could potentially be appropriate. And I'm going to talk in a couple moments about doing a culture audit. I can imagine doing a survey. And why are people even involved? How do they want to grow? What is it about being a volunteer in this organization that's going to help them move forward? Because it's not only about giving to others. What are we gaining individually? That's okay to gain as individuals, even if we're volunteers. So to really maybe start opening the conversation about supporting professional growth, that a volunteer opportunity is great to put on LinkedIn. It's great to put on resumes. It's fantastic for career development. So starting that conversation to support people in thinking about this in perhaps new ways may help you move forward.
Thank you.
Great. And one more before I'm noticing time, and I do want to get to talking about the senior leadership, but let's see, Nahir says that I regularly share professional development opportunities with direct reports and encourage direct reports to set goals around their professional and professional leadership development as part of their annual assessment and work plan for the coming year. I think it normalizes devoting time to it and makes it a priority. Thank you for that. That resonates so well with what I'm sharing. I really agree with that. The only thing I would add is, again, not to just rely on the annual review process. That is a cumulative and a summary, perhaps, and it's great for goal setting. But to be having these discussions during the year that builds up to that annual review is really important. And Tanya's comment in chat is going to be a great lead-in to my next and final section. So let me read it. Tanya says, I think it can be hard for staff to fully trust that they can ask for what they want in terms of growth, especially if it doesn't feel in line with what the organization or their supervisor views as important to the organization. Are there ways you'd suggest that supervisors can help with that? Wow. What a great and difficult question. And there's so many potential ways to look for that. One thing I would do is encourage individuals to be looking for mentors and support, either inside or outside the organization if they have to. But ideally, we want folks to be able to get that support inside the organization. So hopefully individual supervisors can be proactive, bring the conversation up, show that they care. The supervisors can show that they support the professional and leadership development. And then at the organizational level, that message ideally should be presented, which is exactly where I'm going next. So Tanya, we may come back to your question in a couple moments. Okay, so steps and ideas for senior leadership. And when I talk about senior leadership, I'm referring to executive directors, executive teams, and I'm also thinking of the board of directors here. So really the most senior levels. And so some things that I think at the senior level can be done to support leadership development at all levels of the organization. One, to set the clear expectation that staff professional leadership development is a priority. So to make that part of the organizational culture and expectation. To include professional and leadership development as part of annual and strategic planning. To include leadership development in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice initiatives. And to make professional development part of your workplace brand and use it in your recruiting. Now, that's only if you're actually doing it, right? So if you're truly supporting people at all levels to grow professionally and gain leadership skills and experience, then make that part of your job postings and your job descriptions. And when you interview folks, so that it helps make your position that much more attractive, even if your salary may not be as great as they may be able to get elsewhere. So if salary is the number one thing they're looking for, they're going to probably go elsewhere anyway. But if salary and opportunities for development are what they're looking for, then you're going to be more competitive potentially. Some more steps for senior leadership. Make supporting staff growth an expectation from managers and supervisors. So this is part of the job for a manager and supervisor, but they may not know how to do that. So to provide training for new and continuing managers and supervisors. Again, a lot of people do enter supervisory positions without any experience or training in doing so. So how do we support them to really learn the ropes? Because leadership development doesn't stop when one takes on a leadership position. Notice that dramatic pause after saying that. All right, as possible, as realistically possible, to allocate an amount of funding for professional development that individuals can request. So it could be something very small. Maybe it's $50 to enroll in an online webinar, or $100, or maybe it's enough to go to a conference or to enter a leadership development program. I know the Community Foundation for Metro West offers the Emerging Leaders Academy for free, which is just incredible that people apply for it. So it's not guaranteed, but that's an incredible opportunity. So that does not require funding, but it does require making sure people have time and space to attend and really get into it. And finally, to be proactive about any upcoming leadership transitions, to avoid a crisis scenario, and to be building internal talent who potentially can take on leadership positions with the transitions. I just, not too long ago, I facilitated a board retreat. And one of the topics that folks wanted to talk about was an executive transition that's coming up next year. And they're being very proactive, and kudos to the executive for bringing that subject up so that they could plan ahead so that it wasn't a crisis scenario. So often nonprofits get into crises around leadership transitions. If you are involved with a nonprofit that is in crisis mode, you might think about getting an interim executive director or an interim senior staff person who can help keep things steady and offer a lot of experience so that you can get to the point where you can make a good, reasonable decision for hiring rather than a crisis decision. But really, the ideal, I think, is to be proactive and well before you need, well before there's going to be a transition, to do succession planning. Whether or not there are morale or retention issues, consider conducting a culture audit to assess staff perspectives, hopes, and concerns, and use that information to review the organization's strengths and weaknesses in supporting leadership development. So a culture audit is one term. You can think of it as a staff survey. It gets called a lot of different things. You can do an actual survey. You can do focus group discussions. But to really hear what people are saying around professional and leadership development in your organization. All right. So that is we are just about at time. We have just a couple minutes left. I'm more than happy to follow up with people afterwards, but let me see if I can turn to anything. Ellen talks about compensation issues in the board. That really gets at, I'd be willing to talk with you offline. There are also people who specialize in board development work, and that may be a question for them. The Emerging Leaders Academy is going to happen again in the spring, and they'll start recruiting for that either in December or January. Let's see. I think I've covered everything in the chat. Anything else, just as we're closing up shop, or Dennis? I also want to make sure if you want to say a word or two as we close up.
Hi, Bob. I've been, for those of you who joined a little late, I've been lurking in the background. I'm the MC and a nonprofit net board member. Not really, Bob. You've triggered many thoughts for me. I've had a whole career in not-for-profits, but basically not to take any more of the time that's left. I have closing remarks, but nothing to contribute to the conversation at this late date.
That sounds great. Thank you, everyone. And you'll be receiving the slides, you'll be receiving a handout, and I'm happy to follow up. So Dennis, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. And you can tell people have really been engaged and they've stayed with the presentation today. And I think this has helped a lot of folks. So our thanks go to you. And looking ahead to next month's presentation, recruiting board members is a critically important task for nonprofits because the composition of the board can greatly influence its effectiveness and direction. So in next month's Zoominar, you'll learn how to incorporate organizational values in your governance recruitment practices. Our speaker will be Crystal Cherry, Principal and CEO of The Board Pro, which equips and empowers boards to support their missions. And that's going to be Tuesday, November 14th from 1 to 2 p.m. So thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.